What is meant by this term, the Johannine Church? What is the Johannine Church? Meanwhile, the Johannine Church is not a church. That is, it's not a church constituted, and it is not even a church against the church. It is called the Johannine Church, a current, let's say Catholic, Christian, that is born precisely from philosophy and from the preaching of John. But above all, it is part of a concept that I will then perhaps define more clearly. It starts from the preaching of Christ. Therefore, it is, let's say, it is a way of handing down the truths of preaching, especially that part or parts that, let's say, are sometimes forgotten, sometimes are left in the shadows, and sometimes they are even stifled by the evolution of church history. So, let's say that the Johannine Church is made up of characters and historical moments, philosophers, but also simple people who saw in the church those shortcomings that were instead part of the truth, that were, let's say, part of the primitive church of the first and the second centuries, and perhaps even the third century. And therefore it is a continuous renewal within the church itself. And so, let's say, it's a kind of yeast that it is inside the church, and that sometimes it is that yeast that makes the ideas of renewal, of change, and the return to the truth preached by Christ blossom. Consequently, it happens that the Johannine Church is therefore not a religion or a church. It is a current that seeks to keep alive within history. It is as if it were a red thread that starts from the preaching of Christ and comes down to us through different forms and different characters. And this is precisely part of the preaching of Christ, because as Paul said, Jesus Christ is the greatest scientist of the science of the Spirit. He is the greatest scientist of the science of the Spirit because he has shown the world that there is not only materiality, there is not only matter, but spirit also exists. As John said, there is light. God is spirit, John said, and says that the Word, which is part of God, and together with, God created the world, and this Word became light, and this is the focal point. So, let's say, it is part of the Johannine Church in a broad sense. In a general sense, all those who within the church or churches or Catholicity, let's say, are there and study and firmly believe in this, let's say, truth. Thanks, Flavio, for this in-depth answer. Please correct me if I am wrong. So it is right in your opinion that the church, or so-called Church of John, this current Johannine is, let's say, the initiatory church, which deals primarily with the science of the Spirit, while the church, let's call it the Church of Peter, is the church of the right, which mainly deals with the science of the right. Because the right, shall we say, also has its science. Am I wrong to say that? Well, let's put in another form. I wouldn't talk so much about initiation. It's true for us who have made a journey. I have known you since you began a spiritual journey. And I know very well that we always start from an initiatory situation. That is, it starts from a situation where the Spirit searches for the fundamental forms of the approach, faced with this initiation, which we call initiation, but which is not initiation. What is it? It is a direct feeling to look at the things. The church, let's say of Peter, for example, is a church that teaches spiritual truths, but it's above all an exoteric church. That is, at a certain moment, it is the one that is shown to the people through rituality, through the sacraments, and there is a current, fundamental effort on the part of the present Pope that I respect very much, and that also turns a lot to the spiritual aspect, to the purely spiritual aspect of eternal man. And so, let's say, I would speak of an esoteric church and an exoteric church, one created to relate to the science of the Spirit, and the other created for the demonstration of this science on an external level. Therefore, in the demonstration on an external level, sometimes the fundamental essences are lost. So, what I can say, I will give an example that is fundamental. In the 5th century, there was the council that eliminated the double soul. For the Johannine Church, the double soul is a fundamental, because one soul is that animal, the one that animates the physical body. Each animal has its soul. Each animal is animated. But there is the part of the soul that Origen said was created by God since eternity, and which is that soul, that is, which is part of the spark of light, therefore it is eternal, because it will never die, which we call spirit. So there is an animal part and a spiritual part. Very interesting, thanks. Perhaps we could ascribe the first soul, the animal one, the so-called etheric body, the vital body which animates all creation, while the spiritual soul, so to speak, is the cabin of intelligence.
L'abitacolo dell'intelligenza.